Hello everyone, and you're all very warm welcome to this tutorial for the PMDG Boeing 737 for Microsoft Flight Simulator. I'm Emmanuel, I am a real-life Boeing 737 pilot and a member of the PMDG tech team. The aircraft you see is at this point still work in progress, so it's not fully finished, it is a pre-release beta, so you can expect to see some minor issues happening. Anyway, let's get started with the reason you all are here, the takeoff. Before we're going to enter the runway, let's just briefly discuss a few items and techniques. First of all, let's consider one of the most important things in the Boeing 737, the rotation. And the optimal rotation technique is anywhere in the region of about 2 to 3 degrees a second, with the slower rotation being required on the longer airplanes. The reason for that is tail clearance and tail strikes. We are currently sitting in a 737-700 here, and we are using flaps 5 for the takeoff. That gives us a lift-off attitude of approximately 9.1 degrees, and the tail strike attitude of this aircraft is 14.7 degrees. That means you do have some margin left there. However, if you are sitting in a longer airplane type, like the 737-800 or 900, let's have a closer look at the exact numbers. In the 737-800, using flaps 5, you have a tail strike attitude of just 11 degrees, while the normal liftoff attitude is 8 degrees. That means if you're rotating at a normal rate of about 2 degrees a second, you're just about a second and a half from tail strike by the time the airplane lifts off, if you do it correctly. If you're doing it incorrectly and rotate much faster, then your tail clearance is going to reduce even further. And to give you a perspective of what things look like, during a normal rotation, the tail of the airplane is going to get just about 50 centimeters above the runway using flaps 5. If you're using flaps 1 in the 737-800, it's going up down to 33 degrees down above the runways. And that's, again, using the correct technique. If you're rotating faster, that means that your airplane is going to have even less tail clearance. Finally, looking at the 737-900, the tail strike attitude of that airplane is 10 degrees, and the normal liftoff happens at 7.5 degrees. So that's about the same margin you have as you have in the 737-800. We're flying a shorter bodied aircraft today, the 737-700, so rotation will be a little bit faster than it should be, for example, in the 800 or in the 900. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're watching this tutorial at a point where the longer bodied airplane types are released already. Now this set, let's quickly move on. Thrust setting for takeoff. The normal technique here is to advance your engines to 40%, then press toga, and then the auto throttle is going to do the rest for you. The auto throttle might be overshooting the target N1 by up to 4%. However, the important part is that it's thereafter reducing the thrust again to the desired setting, and to a thrust that's anywhere between the target and the target up to plus 1%. However, when you have a lot of headwind, then it might happen that your airspeed is increasing above 64 knots before the auto throttle is actually finished setting your takeoff thrust. 64 knots is the speed where it's shifting from the N1 mode to the thrust hold mode, and therefore it's going to leave the thrust wherever it is the moment this occurs. So if that happens, have a good look on your engine display if you're taking off with a strong headwind of more than 20 knots, just to ensure that the auto throttle is actually setting takeoff thrust correctly. Should it not do it, then, as always, when the auto throttle is not doing what it's supposed to do, switch it off and set your thrust manually. The last thing I want to discuss here is the technique of entering the runway. Many of you are just following the yellow line. The yellow line, however, is for vacating the runway, not for entering it. When you're entering the runway, you don't want to waste any runway that you have available, because runway in front of you is a good runway. Runway behind you is useless. So when you're entering the runway, go straight on it, or if you have one that would extend further to the other side, you can also make a slight turn into the other side, and then turn it with a strong tiller input to line up. That way you'll keep the most runway in front of you where you want it to be. Alright, in this video I'm not going to cover the takeoff go and no-go decisions. There are some very good tutorials on that available, and there is even a video by Boeing themselves on the go and no-go decision that I can only recommend you to look up. Hoping that I'll remember, I am going to link to that video in the video description below. Alright, that is going to cover my brief introduction that probably turned out a fair bit longer than I wanted it to do in the beginning, so let's get started. The moment we get our lineup clearance, we have to perform the runway entry procedures. The strobe lights are going on, the fixed landing lights are going on. We don't touch the retracts or the taxi light at this point. They're going to stay off until we have actually received our takeoff clearance. If you're flying an airplane with LED lights, it's probably not even going to have retractable landing lights at all. Switch the auto throttle on, turn on LNAV, and switch the transponder to the TARA position. And we're quickly going to go over the before takeoff checklist. Flaps, 5, green light, stabilizer trim, 6.4 units set. Before takeoff checklist complete. Personally, I find it to be good practice, even though not in the Boeing manuals, to do takeoff config check as well when you're entering the runways. So just bring your thrust levers up to a high position above 70% N1 approximately, and then pull them back immediately. If there was anything wrong with the takeoff configuration of your aircraft, you would hear the takeoff warning sound going off. Quick word as well, I'm not using VNAV for the takeoff in this very tutorial. I'm going to do a second tutorial where we are going to use VNAV for the takeoff. The reason is that my airline simply does not do VNAV takeoffs. And not more than 10 knots here. Now we're going to bring the airplane all the way up to the center line, and then we're going to align it with the runway. It is Boeing policy to do a rolling takeoff whenever it's possible, so assuming we get any takeoff clearance, we'll turn on the lights, start the timing, and off we go. Bring the thrust up to 40% where you want it to stabilize. Call out stabilize, then press toga. We've got a hidden click spot for that down here on the MCP. Set takeoff thrust. Takeoff thrust set, indications normal. Hold slide forward pressure until 80 knots.
80 knots.
Checked.
V1. Rotate. Positive rate of climb.
Gear up. .400 feet, LNAV. Try not to rotate over 20 degrees of pitch. And at 1,000 feet above the airport elevation, that's the top of the wideband, we're going to engage the autopilot and buck up. Once the nose of the airplane is coming down and we start to see the trend vector and you're above the white dot, you can retract the flaps to 1. And when we're passing the 1 buck, we can retract the flaps to the up position. So, flaps up. We've got 1,000 feet to go to the level of altitude. As soon as the flaps are showing up no lights, we can use vertical speed mode to reduce our vertical speed in order to avoid possible conflicts with traffic above. Keep in mind the initial climb on the SID here is 4,000 feet. So we want to level off at 4,000 feet here. Alright, and we have flaps up, no lights. We're going to remain on a local altimeter setting here, since we want to maintain the 4,000 feet for now. And let's do the Aftertake of Checklist. Landing gear to the off position, auto brakes off, start switches off, and we can turn the taxi light and the retractable landing lights off as well. However, keep the fixed landing lights on for now. Alright, let's do the Aftertake of Checklist. Engine bleeds. On. Packs. Auto. Landing gear. Up and off. And flaps. Up, no lights. Aftertake of Checklist complete. And now that we are level in 4000, we can re-engage VNAV, so the airplane is going to accelerate to our final climb speed. And let's at this point in time assume that we are getting further climb clearance by ATC, and we're going to dial the altitude up. Let's take, for example, flight level 110 here. And now, since we're still in VNAV path, the airplane still wants to maintain those 4,000 feet over here. So now we press altitude intervent, and that is going to clear the restrictions one by one, provided the MCP altitude is set higher than the altitude restrictions on the lags page. Now it's switching to VNAV speed, and now it's starting to climb. As we are flying through the clouds, have a look at the true air temperature over here, and be aware that if the temperature is 10 degrees or less, you do want to turn on the engine anti-ice. Passing the transition altitude, set standard, and cross-check it, passing level 63, climbing flight level 110. The Aftertake of Checklist is complete already, and make sure that the standby instruments is set as well. Alright, this shall do for today's takeoff tutorial. I am going to do a second tutorial where I'm going to show you how to use VNAV for the takeoff. However, this is the way it's done without VNAV in my particular airline. I would like to thank you very much for watching, and see you all on the next tutorial.